In Transformers Robots in Disguise 2001, one of the characters is named Scourge. He is one of the bad guys. He is a Decepticon, and he was born out of an Autobot stasis pod that was reawakened by Megatron, but when the stasis pod tried to scan a vehicle mode, it scanned a jet fuel tanker truck along with Optimus Prime. And so when Scourge was born, there was quite a question about what exactly his personality and temperament and allegiances would be, because he was obviously given a bit of Megatron's spark, and so just like the other 5 Decepticons, you would think that he would become a Decepticon and be on the bad side. But he also scanned Optimus Prime, and inside the tanker truck there was a human, Kelly, and so all 3 factors were at play all at once. The humans, Autobots, and Decepticons were all at play simultaneously for Scourge, and so exactly what his nature would be up in the air. Over the course of the series, Scourge becomes the most fascinating and leading force of the bad guys. He is the one that is obviously leading the Decepticons into battle and making command strategic and logistical decisions, but also he is engaged in political intrigue. He is the one who is telling Megatron certain facts in order to make Megatron make certain decisions. He is also trying to position himself in relation to the Predacons and Skybite in order for them to do certain things, and also he maintains his position in power over the other Decepticons. And so Scourge immediately comes off as the most fascinating and interesting character in Transformers, and it clearly reaches the point where he is frustrated with his position being a loyal lieutenant commander of Megatron. He understands that Megatron is this incompetent, maniacal, megalomaniac fool, and the only way that the bad guys are possibly going to win this mission is if he becomes the leader instead. And so he appreciates how bad of a leader Megatron is, and he wants to try to take over, but he knows that he can't until he gains a force strong enough that he would be able to launch a coup and get rid of Megatron and become the new leader of both the Decepticons and the Predacons. And that of course happens. Once he gains control of Fortress Maximus, Scourge then makes his move, declaring that he's sick and tired of Megatron and that he wants to become the leader, and he is looking to kill Megatron. In a certain sense, there's a certain Starscream-esque element to Scourge's behaviour in terms of political intrigue, in terms of wanting to lead. But in terms of his overall character, Scourge is entirely different. Starscream seems to be obsessed with the idea of ruling in and of itself, and he just wants the power that comes with being the leader, while Scourge is a military commander, and he wants efficiency and productivity and ruthlessness when it comes to military operations. And so that's why he is in the position of wanting power, because he knows that's the only way that the Decepticons could possibly defeat the Autobots and complete their mission and become victorious over Earth. So that is one of the major differences. So the trigger point for how Scourge shifts his personality seems to be when he approaches Fortress Maximus and has his memories unlocked through a certain fantastical event. So up until that point when he is awakened and reanimated by Megatron, and then up until the point when he approaches Fortress Maximus, Scourge is just a loyal and obedient lieutenant commander of Megatron. But then, once he becomes awakened, once Fortress Maximus reawakens the programming inside of Scourge, then the change happens, where Scourge no longer is willing to accept Megatron's orders. He starts bad-mouthing him behind his back, and he starts engaging in all sorts of scheming and intriguing. So it's that point that we see a new element of Scourge's personality, that he starts to become a more interesting and more provocative political player in this story. Up until that point, the most important political players were Megatron and Skybite, Megatron being the leader of the entire bad guys, and Skybite being the leader of the Predacons. But after that, Scourge really becomes an interesting political player. And it seems to be that the whole point is that the Autobot stasis pods were sent to Earth alongside Fortress Maximus, and there was a certain programmatic unity between them, both the Autobot stasis pods and Fortress Maximus, that the Autobot stasis pods were there to protect Fortress Maximus. In that case, Scourge's programming had been perverted and corrupted when he was reawakened with Megatron's spark, and it was not until Fortress Maximus actually came close to Scourge, and Scourge had those files reawakened that had been closed off to him up until that point thanks to Megatron. It was not up until that point that Scourge began to remember his true mission being that he needed to complete the process of actually awakening Fortress Maximus and achieving that power that Fortress Maximus holds. So that seems to be all rather logical, and it makes sense, but plenty of things don't make sense and they need to be dealt with and resolved. The first point is that Scourge and the other Decepticons were sent to Earth by the Autobot alongside Fortress Maximus as Autobots in order to protect Fortress Maximus. But in terms of how Scourge reawakens and remembers things, he remembers about Fortress Maximus. He remembers that his mission is to retrieve and revive Fortress Maximus, but he doesn't remember the fact that he originally is an Autobot, and he doesn't start to think about whether or not his allegiances to the Decepticon cause and to the Predacon cause are actually worthwhile. And so there needs to be some sort of explanation for why this is so. Why did Scourge remember some things and not others? And until those answers are provided to us, we're left with a rather incomplete picture in terms of Scourge's motivations and agency and determination and agenda. The next issue that is at play comes back to the very nature of Scourge's birth, because Scourge is the creation of 3 different ingredients. First of all, the Predacon leader Megatron, then the Autobot leader Optimus Prime, and then the human Kelly. And he, of course, scanned the vehicle of the jet fuel container, so he became a truck. But the three-way dynamics of how Scourge's personality and his very biological nature is split into this three-way direction is never fully fleshed out and explored and taken advantage of by the storyline. It seems as though the writers just weren't given the space and opportunity and the direction that they needed in order to give this character and the story around this character the full scope of development. And so in the end, Scourge never actually reaches his full potential, and he doesn't become the fully developed and fully complicated three-way bad guy that he might otherwise have become. And that's, of course, all rather disappointing. So in the end, the idea that Scourge had scanned Kelly is only ever brought up in a single episode. It is only in a single episode that Scourge actually remembers that he has human DNA within his core programming, but also he decides that that is a tactically meaningful fact, and he actually decides to take advantage of it in terms of the battlefield and the plot and the storyline. In terms of the other two, that's where things get a bit more interesting. So the final two pieces of the puzzle are the fact that the stasis pod that would become Scourge scanned both Optimus Prime and Megatron. Now, how this comes about in terms of explaining Scourge's personality is going to be rather interesting. And for the most part, the best explanation that we have been provided with is the idea that Megatron's personality is what has dictated what Scourge's personality is going to become. Because Megatron is an egotist, he is maniacal, he is scheming, he is deceptive, he is a liar, and he's deeply, deeply selfish. And he then creates this new creature of Scourge, who is then deceitful and lying and schemes, and in the end tries to plot against and kill his master. And so from that point of view, it seems as though Megatron has created a creature that is a duplicate of his own personality, which has then plotted against him. It's as though Megatron has sealed his own fate and his own downfall by creating a creature that is so much similar to him, and the fact that he has such an undesirable and unpleasant and rather unwelcoming personality is then duplicated in Scourge, and then there is eventually going to be a fight-off between the two of them. You can't have two egotistical, maniacal, and scheming and plotting creatures in the one organization. Eventually one of them will destroy the other. And that's eventually what happens. Scourge launches the coup against Megatron, trying to take over and become the leader of the Decepticons and Predacons, but he fails in it, and in the end Megatron gets to win the day. He defeats Scourge, and then he reprograms Scourge so that Scourge is returned to being that loyal lieutenant commander that he once was. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that has least been touched on, the one that never got fully explored, that got properly fleshed out, that never really got to achieve anything of significance, is the idea that Scourge has scanned some of Optimus, and that there is a certain amount of Autobot goodness inside of Scourge's personality, and that eventually, if Scourge searches deep enough inside of him, he can see that he should be a good guy, and that he should swap sides and become an Autobot. And not only the fact that obviously all of the Decepticons were once Autobot stasis pods, but especially Scourge, because Scourge is the one who also scanned Optimus. And that isn't really touched on at all. This idea that there might be an inner turmoil inside of Scourge that is making him uncertain about who he wants to be and where he wants to go and what he wants to achieve. It just never actually gets fleshed out and really dealt with as a major theme in the storyline. Only very barely. First of all, in the episode when Scourge is reanimated and arises from the stasis pod, some comments are made that Scourge happens to look very similar to Optimus. And then there is the episode when the Decepticons pretend that they have broken free of Megatron's evil control, and they say that they have been won over to the Autobot cause, only as a ruse in order to then gain access to the Autobot control base and teleport system so that they can then destroy the Autobots once and for all. And the idea of that storyline is that Optimus has believed in his heart that Scourge and the other Decepticons are not truly Decepticons, they're not truly bad guys, that there is some goodness deep inside of them, and that eventually this will come to the surface and they'll swap sides. And that gullibility, that hopefulness, is what makes Optimus vulnerable, so that when the Decepticons show up, telling him that they have swapped sides, telling them that they've broken free of Megatron, that they don't want to be Decepticons anymore and that they want to be Predacons, Optimus is in a vulnerable position and actually believes them, and he goes along with the plan. And it is only through a series of contingent events in the third act that the Decepticons don't actually get to be successful and pull off their mission and actually gain control of the Autobot base. Now, after that point, after that episode, and we are only some halfway through the entire episode lot of Robots in Disguise 2001, it's never brought up again, and it's rather odd, and there's no clear explanation for why this can't become a recurring theme, as though Optimus holds out hope that eventually Scourge and the other Decepticons will be won over to the Autobot cause, and that there is an inner conflict inside of Scourge, as though Scourge is not sure about what he wants to do, and he might actually have a bit of goodness inside of him that is causing him inner turmoil. There have been characters in the past, such as Dinobot and Black Arachnia, who have gone through this process, who were part of the bad guys, but did not feel as though their status within this organization was very suitable, and so they have tried, in a sort of yearnful ambition, to break free of it in order to pursue some sort of alternative system, which often means defecting to the Autobots. So it's not as though there hasn't been a precedent for what Scourge could have gone through, that he could have started to feel as though maybe he is meant to be a good guy, and that Optimus's spark energy inside of him actually is working its way through him and making him conflicted in what he should do. But unfortunately, that never actually becomes something. So, that about wraps it up in terms of what has to be said about Scourge. The thing is that Scourge has only ever appeared in that one piece of media. Only Transformers Robots in Disguise 2001 has ever had him as a character. That's his only in-cartoon appearance. And so we just have to study this one appearance and have some comments about it and critique it and try and understand it, because there are no other examples of Scourge on the screen that we can also take forth in furthering our understanding of his personality and character. Hopefully one day we will see another Scourge character, and that would be a very big improvement. I think Scourge has been underappreciated and under-recognized as far as Transformers canon and lore is concerned, and I would really like to see him make another appearance in another Transformers cartoon. But until then, we only have this one show to work from, and in it I do not think that Scourge fully reached his full potential as a character. He's a very good character, he's a very exciting character, but in the end he doesn't become the complete character that he could have been, considering the material that he has to work on. So that ends my discussion of Scourge, and I'm sure to have further points to say about some of the other characters in Transformers Robots in Disguise at some point in the future. But until then, that ends my commentary for this podcast, and I'll have to speak to you next time for further commentary on further issues. So until then, goodbye. Keep your eye on Transformers cartoons, because one is coming very soon later on in this year. Until then, goodbye.